Subjectivity of Experience, 18th of June, 2025. 3 days ago, I was visiting the Gallo-Roman Museum, and while I was observing the artifacts that I now have some knowledge of, I was also listening to the discussion of three old ladies going through the museum at my same pace. I was first very pleased by what I heard, for they were utterly enthralled by all that they were seeing, complimenting the Romans' strong and delicate work, yet also comparing them to our own times. Their discourse came from a place of love and admiration, but not of knowledge. The most vocal one was saying how strong they must be to move the immense sculptures, unlike us. And at one point she said the following: "When archaeologists in 1,000 years search for what we left behind, what will they find? Phones." She said it laughingly, with complete conviction of our inferiority to the ancients. Phones, the supercomputers we keep in our pockets that can tell us in seconds any question we have on all gathered human knowledge. What will they think of us? It was only later that I realized how ridiculous the comment was. I was first very much appreciating her passion. But now, with 1 year of training in the social sciences, I'm beginning to understand matters of the subjectivity of value, and I realized that she was not functioning on critical analysis, but purely on value judgments. To her, the point of visiting the museum was not to objectively observe the evolution of human creation and culture, but to praise times past in comparison to our supposed lesser times. It is as if, to my mind, as if she mistook the very reason why these kinds of museums exist. Obviously, I cannot blame her. She hasn't been taught, and I barely have been. I may have spent days analyzing the artifacts you are seeing for the first time, but I am still in learning of the methodology of academic thinking. During the beginning of the year, maybe 8 months ago, I had done a presentation on the Huns. I had done it with immense passion, and I was pretty proud of my work. My professor was less so. He seemed disappointed, yet obligated to present tolerance. I think now that it is because I actually made a lot of value judgments over the course of the presentation. I was presenting Ammianus Marcellinus's report of the Huns, and comparing it to what we know of them through archaeology. I was saying he was right on this and wrong on that, in a pretty systematic and judgmental manner, when the point of a text analysis is more so to extract knowledge from the text than it is to criticize the writer. My professor had showed tolerance towards my value judgments, because he knew I was not yet much trained to detect them, so I will do my best to tolerate them in others. As I have said in some other writings, I think that on matters one has not spent a lot of time critically assessing, one has to rely on dogma, on the current presumed truth. Objectivity is difficult, on top of being ultimately somewhat impossible. I do wish that more people were trained in it, instead of it being relegated to academics. For analysis to be critical, it must be detached, and that is inherently something difficult to do. Our animal brains are not programmed to think of the picture without wondering how we fit into it, how it affects our lot, our position, our identity. We have crafted tools that help in objectivity, yet we ourselves have inseparable lens upon our vision. This is why religions say that God or gods have human shapes. It is due to our subjective vision. This is why gender roles exist and gender distinct from sex still operates within the roles. It is due to our subjective vision. The Gallo-Roman Museum presented an objective evolution of human creation, from Celtic to Roman to Christian culture. It did not say that any was better than the other, or better than ours. It is objective data, be it of subjective people. The old ladies were not seeing it as data. They were seeing what place it had in their subjective lens, their accepted truth of the world. And thus I'm forced to believe that they almost always function in this subjectivity, never being able to see data without giving it a moral or cultural judgment, and wondering how it affects their ego-oriented mental construction of the world. We are just animals, and our minds are practical tools. It is completely normal that we function this way. But we also have the capacity to reduce the judgment of data. I would say that it would only be beneficial to reduce our subjectivity, but even that is a value judgment. We are forced to observe the universe through these lenses crafted by the arbitrary state of life on Earth. A cracked fallen tree with a smoking trunk is just that to objective observation, if such a thing can exist. But to the mind of an animal, it indicates something unusual, maybe a storm that threatens our life, and so we must seek shelter. This tool is a part of us. It is the reason why we have survived and evolved. Yet this subjective consciousness is also that with which we try to scientifically understand all things. Buddhism suggests that the subjective mind is layered on top of an objective consciousness, but likely it is that the consciousness itself is inherently subjective, yet still it is our only tool to strive towards Objective understanding. 3 years ago, I wrote this strange philosophical phrase regarding this matter. We are the forks that we use to drink soup. What is meant here is that we have not the shape for perfectly assessing neither science nor philosophy, yet still it is the only tool we have, and we must make the best of it, for glimpses of objectivity it gives us in the work. I have been thinking about the matters of value judgment a lot recently. The last time that I saw my sibling, less than 2 weeks ago, 2 topics had emerged through our discussions: communism and pederasty. With I myself knowing very little about communism, she presented her understanding of it to me, bringing it in a somewhat negative light, without letting it bend facts. I shared that communism was a large part of the oppression of Taoism in China, but she was slightly confused to see that I did not have a negative view of communism in spite of this fact, because I don't. Matters can be neither positive nor negative. In fact, that is inherently their true state. Later, I talked about pederasty, a matter I do know more about. It felt as if, as I was explaining what it is and how it took shape, she was continuously trying to discern if my opinion of it was positive or negative, and I showed hints of neither. In her mind, it resembled too much pedophilia for the negative label she placed on it to be nuanced. The fact that 2 males in a pederastic relation could only be a few years apart did not seemingly add nuance, because the fact that one of the 2 members has to be immature, which generally means a minor or a young adult, systematically meant that it was unalterably negative. This solidity of value does have social advantages, but it is entirely non-scientific, by the fact that it is a value judgment, not a cold observation of facts. She was searching for my opinion for whether it was positive or negative, and she found none, because I have none. With time, I had learned to just see it as a fact. Any moral judgment would be a historical distortion on my part. And even compared to our present morality, it still is nuanced enough a matter to not be thrown into the side of bad. Truly, these ideas tie in strongly with some of my resentment towards Christianity. Christianity does not see morality as subjective. It considers that its God has a clear idea of what is right and what is wrong, and this is even more accentuated in Islam. The opinions of he who created the universe by speech can only be objective truths, and so it has trouble accepting the relativity of morality. In Christian thinking, there is such a thing as good and evil. Moral ideas are tied to the very fabric of existence. A difference with Islam is that to many Christians, the Bible can sometimes not be taken to the word, having been through at least one translation and being born from the reports of multiple mortal subjects, though some groups such as the fundamentalists disagree. And the Bible's morality does not evolve with human morality. According to it, homosexuality still is on the side of evil. This is the complete opposite of rational scientific reasoning, for scientific reasoning requires value judgments to be diminished as much as possible, and Christianity, with its concepts of good and evil, says that the value judgments themselves are existential truths. Evil is a horrible concept, the idea that something can be judged as negative by the universe itself, without understanding that this judgment comes from our arbitrary animal minds, born from our arbitrary animal conditions, on an arbitrary rock floating through infinite time and infinite space. 22nd of June, 2025. I think that I've come to understand some of the reasoning principles that my sibling adopts that is opposed to mine, and which the popular opinion is largely adopting. They value what an individual identifies as highly than rational evidence. In the matters of gender distinct from sex, it still has the inherently negative effect of perpetuating gender rules and flawed concepts of supposed objectivity in gender. But at least I have found a principle on which the idea claims ground. It doesn't matter if it is negative for all others. If the individual identifies as such, that is to them what matters. They put vague, unclear interior identification higher than any pragmatic evidence. This also explains the very large tolerance that my siblings hold towards religion, which I had failed to understand the reasoning for before now. I would like to analyze and confront this value placed on interior identification, supposedly ever more important than any exterior proof. When trying to reconstruct an event that happened in the past, let's say antiquity or the Middle Ages, historians will have multiple sources, multiple elements will contradict each other. Archaeology will bring some faint amount of information that we can suppose more objective. Historians will emit theories, and historians will disagree with each other. Multiple different explanations of the event will be given, varying in detail, varying in certitude. But the fact that we are not sure what the one objective explanation is does not change the fact that there is one objective explanation. Usually, though not always, the most amount of evidence will point towards what really happened, but room for disagreeing will always have place. I'm sure you can easily place this analogy on all kinds of present dilemmas of faithful supposition against rational observation. An easy one would be religion. My sibling assumes that all beliefs are equal because her value is placed on the interior right of supposition. She places more value on the right to believe than on critical observation, and I do not. You see, it's a very nuanced dilemma, because neither of us are inherently flawed for the method we adopt. But as the analogy presents, the truth is singular. It doesn't matter what you believe, what matters is the evidence. All of our evidence points towards the non-existence of any God, and though the supposition of the existence of gods can be made for total certitude against the theory is not present, it does not change that all of the evidence points against it, which makes it a less rational theory than the one truth the evidence is pointing towards, the non-existence of gods. The suppositions are multiple, but the truth is singular. On matters of gender, my arguments have been that femininity and masculinity are not objective concepts. But I see now that the reason why this argument is meaningless to her is because it doesn't matter if they exist or not in observable reality. They only have to exist in the mind of the person to be valid according to her reasoning. Why is this? Is it identity that they hold in so high value? I can only suppose so. Maybe they should ask themselves why they give such immense importance to identity, and if things would be better if they did not. For gender, it is quite a problematic cycle. Gender expectations are subjective constructs that push individuals to identify on a gender, and identifying on a gender increases or at the least perpetuates gender expectation. My solution is to remove the identifying on a gender part of the equation, to break the cycle. But my sibling and the popular consensus she thinks with give such immense importance to identity, whether it be grounded on realistic facts or not, that to them it should not be removed. Therians are the penultimate demonstration of this identity valued higher than factual evidence dilemma. I always come back to thinking that it is because of the luxury we live in the Western world. We only give such immense importance to our identities because they have took center stage in our worlds and worldview as a whole. It makes sense that markers of identity are valued as so much more important in the West than in the East. And among the markers, sexuality is currently the biggest one. It is because the West is focused on the individual and the East on the community. This is the case on every characteristic: politics, religion, culture. China and Russia have been the center stages for communism, and the United States for capitalism. Confucianism in China and Shintoism in Japan work for the cooperation of society, in which they consider the individual to be less important than the whole, defined by it instead of the other way around. While the Abrahamic religions in the West, and more than any Christianity, are extremely individualists, considering that the individual's personal relation with the God Yahweh and the demigod Jesus are the most central elements. Thus, the individual is the focus rather than the whole. This dichotomy can be found even in modern fiction. Superheroes, a Western invention, are as individualistic as you can get, while animes tend to focus on the group being the most important component, as is the case in Naruto or Attack on Titan. And all of Hayao Miyazaki's movies have a heavy communal undertone. So why am I saying all this? Well, because it allows to observe the subjectivity of the focus on individuality and thus on identity. This exists in the West because of the way our society has evolved, but it could have been otherwise, and in the East, it is otherwise. Now that we are exposed to the ways of the West of the world, we can use it to understand that which we failed to see as subjective. Let's teach ourselves to see the world through evidence instead of through what people make of the evidence. 23rd of June, 2025. Facts don't care about your feelings. It's a phrase that English speakers seem to not take seriously and like mocking, the reasoning for which escapes me. I think that a difference in thinking I have with my sibling is the fact that she values people's emotions higher than rationality, and I do not. I consider science to be more important than our individual lives and opinions. I consider that the evidence is more important than what people make of the evidence. She has a humanistic perspective that supposes that science should serve humanity, and I consider that humanity exists to construct science. If we consider that all interpretations, however distant from the most likely truth the evidence points towards, are equally valid, we are allowing irrationality in our equations. The lesser theories should always be allowed, and probably encouraged to be maintained. It is well to consider every perspective, but it is unhelpful to give unlikely theories equal ground to likely theories. Superstition should not have equal ground with science. In academia, we understand this well now, but the rest of society does not. They still suppose that rational thinking should be halted if it hurts an individual's emotions or identity. We should always be allowed to openly criticize superstition. People's frail emotions should not be an obstacle to rational thinking. This is what I believe. You have the right of superstition, an unscientific ideology, but I do not have an obligation to respect it. Rationality should come first. 19th of July, 2025. Debating with my mother is incredibly degrading to my reasoning capacities. She always has total certitude of her presumed knowledge. If I believe in opinion B at 65%, her belief in opinion A will be at 100%, which means that I must either abandon the debate, leaving us both with her singular, likely incorrect opinion, or defend opinion B, but every time that I do so, the debate becomes dichotomic, the nuances get lost. I get cornered into a totalistic view of opinion B that I should have otherwise avoided. I do not yet know how to resolve this. My best temporary solution is to stay away from her, so that I may cultivate my capacity at nuance. The reason why she holds total certitude in all her opinions during a debate is because the goal to her is not to confront ideas, it is to win. She wants to be right even when she does not understand her own arguments. I have witnessed it. I do not want to be like her ever. I must learn to separate ego from knowledge or critical reasoning. 20th of July, 2025. How do I maintain my 65% belief in opinion B when facing someone with a 100% belief in opinion A? If I insist too little, I will never get to illustrate a point, and if I insist too hard, I will lose the nuance I was supposed to maintain. The problem with debating against people who only hold beliefs at 100% is that it makes it hard to maintain one's own nuance against them, and yet we must, or else the debate becomes dichotomic. But you cannot disprove anything to someone who holds belief at 100%. The best solution is clear. It is to not educate them, to leave them in their totalistic semi-ignorance. I must stop debating with my mother. She does not have the capacity for it. 21st of July, 2025. I have reread the last dozens of pages on thinking about sexuality, those that are the best presented, for by that point, my thinking and documentation were getting rich and nuanced. But there is a detail that I have left behind that I want to bring back into this fuller understanding of sexuality. I disapprove of gender distinct from sex, of transgender, because it perpetuates gender roles and believe that behavior and aesthetic must conform to gender, which I am totally opposed to. But more specifically, it is the classification of gender by sociological traits that I disagree with, those traits being behavior and aesthetic. As I have stated long before, I am not inherently opposed to transsexual, in that, unlike transgender, transsexual qualifies itself by physiological traits, which does not in itself perpetuate gender roles. The traits we select for composing the taxonomy are always at least partly arbitrary. It is true that to qualify whether an entity is male or female, one might judge on the combination of traits, chromosomes, hormones, genitals, physiology. Or one might depend a judgment on just one or a few. The classification has a faint part of the arbitrary. This is why I agree with transsexual more than I disagree with it. If we decide that the trait for qualifying the difference can be hormones only, a person doing HRT will be of the sex they have transitioned to. But, to be clear, it is not just because it is more scientific that I agree with transsexual rather than transgender, but specifically because this classification does not take into account behavior or sociology. It does not inherently state that this is how a male should behave and this is how a female should behave, which are statements that transgender does make. Transgender is sexist. It perpetuates and reinforces gender roles. A misuse of transsexual can also do that, but at least this sexism is not the foundation it is built upon. I disagree with classifying gender by behavior correlation. I disagree even more with classifying gender by aesthetic. Obviously, that is just blatant, unnecessary gender roles, but behavior is the more subtle one, and thus it is this one that I will explain. It is true that overall, the male and female sex groups have behavior correlations overall distinct from one another. But here is the thing, they are distinct overall. The behavior correlation does not apply to all in the sex group. A large percentage will always have behaviors that correlate closer with that of the other sex group. But what do all in the sex groups have in common, not just overall but in their totality? Chromosomes, hormones, genitals. If we classify by sociology rather than physiology, we are claiming that the behaviors of the minorities belong to the other sex group. This is sexism. We are announcing that they don't belong, and that our overall understanding of the sex group is more important than the subtle reality of it. Behavior correlation is a correlation. It does not systematically apply, but gender distinct from sex implies that it does. Why would we consider that the masculine percentage of males is more intrinsic to the sex group than the feminine percentage of males? This arbitrary and sexist judgment is specifically what transgender implies. Feminine males are males. They're a reminder that masculine and feminine are arbitrary correlations. Transgender is so unprogressive. Gender based on physiology admits that behavior loosely correlates with gender. Gender based on behavior states that it is a component rather than a correlation. It states that this is how males and females must be sociologically perceived. It states that behaviors otherwise present in both sex groups should be component of the one that presents it the most strongly. It takes the sexist and totalistic understanding of gender humans have had throughout history and perpetuates it and brings it out all the more instead of destroying it. Why can't the male sex group also be characterized by the ever-present feminine males that compose it? By believing in gender distinct from sex, you are reinforcing your flawed, incorrect, sexist perception of the sex group instead of getting rid of gender expectation and admitting that this minority exists and is a part of the whole. What does it mean to be a boy? Having a masculine behavior. So boys can't have a feminine behavior? Sure, well, it's the dress in this manner. So girls can't dress masculine and boys can't dress feminine? Sure, well, I just feel like a boy. Help me understand what that means. Maybe a stoicism and not caring for aesthetic? So can boys not be unstoic, and can they not care about aesthetic? I just relate to boys more than to girls. So girls who relate to boys more than to girls are not true girls, even if they want to? There is no good justification for transgender. It is gender roles, sexism, on every point. 23rd of July, 2025. The way I act with my mother makes her think that I have a disproportionately big ego, and the way I act with my friends makes them think that I have a disproportionately small ego, and I don't know which of the two is truer. I wouldn't know how to judge. A problem I have with debating with my mother is that the subtlety and nuance of the opinions I present seem to always be lost on her. Here are two cases I have analyzed where she has stripped my viewpoints from their nuance. 4 weeks ago, we debated about the religion that is voodoo. I had been reading about it for only a week and stated that according to what knowledge I had yet accumulated, I was guessing that voodoo dolls were a popular deformation. She understood that as my penultimate opinion on the matter and set to contest it. A few days after, we debated about feminism, and I stated that my life's viewpoint did not make me observe any sexism in the world around me. She understood that as my penultimate opinion on the matter and set to contest it. In both these cases, the opinions I presented, whether correct or wrong, were faithful results of data I had accumulated and my understanding of it. I had made sure to precise as such, formulating my understandings based on which level I was educated on the matter. Those subtleties went over her head every time. I have come to believe that she has trouble scaling her beliefs accordingly to her documentation of the matters. On some topics where I was very educated and certain of my knowledge, she still contested with the same level she presents all of her opinions. And the problem, I observe, is that she thinks others do the same. She strips away my subtlety and thinks my opinions are as totalistic as hers. An incorrect opinion, faithfully based off of true data yet incomplete, is a valid opinion. It is fine to be wrong if it is for good reasons. When learning about a new subject, you will be wrong about much of it for long, as you learn. The important part is to scale the opinion to the level of knowledge as to attribute the level of certainty you must give it. It is this that my mother does too little, and worse, always assumes that I do not. Her opinions are totalistic, and she fails to notice when mine are not. 26th of July, 2025. I love indie games of the 2010s. Along with Greek antiquity, they are my current biggest passions. There's something so peculiar in how Michael Afton is portrayed in recent FNAF art. He is handsome and horrific at the same time, literally purple with a decaying body, for he is haunting his own corpse, yet so composed and alive in soul, reflective, melancholic, at peace. It is such a powerful mix of contradicting attributes. His eyes are so often at the same time spirit-like and so human. A particular piece of him that I love shows his cheeks decomposing and teeth showing on both sides, but his lips intact, and his face handsome and composed, and still very emotive. What comes off of this character is one that has much suffered, been through so much that he died through it, and literally decomposed, only to then, with the passing of time and the change of circumstances, slowly find peace and healing. Except the whole point is that deep wounds can never be closed. You can only choose to be at peace with them. I relate to this so much. When I was depressed, I saw myself in my mind's eye as a horrifying decaying corpse. The image that came was that of Meaty during her metamorphosis, as her flesh peeled off and her eyes bulged out. And in the years that followed, although the emotion was never that intense, it was so because I felt like I had already died, and I was just very slowly decomposing, body and soul. But then the unexpected happened. Circumstances changed. Life became simple. I had much time for reflection. Through baking and hiking and meditating and reading and cultivating hobbies, I found stability in my mind and realized that I was alive, and worse, chose to say so. But the wounds were still there. Nothing could erase them. What happened was that I discovered how to be at peace with them. This is why I love fan art of Michael Afton so much. It is the same emotion that the 2020 indie game Omori was all about. As the credits song Good Morning said so well, though the pain remains and though it may be hard, I'll carry on. Je suis horrifié à l'idée que j'aurais pu passer ma vie sans savoir que les gens que j'ai rencontrés ces dernières années existaient. Après avoir passé 8 ans sans amis, j'ai finalement rencontré des gens que j'apprécie. J'ai rencontré des gens, et une fille plus que tout autre, qui comme moi fonctionnent par logique plutôt que par dogme. Les humains fonctionnent plus par dogme que par logique. C'est naturel. C'est comme ça que nous avons évolué. La logique arbitraire interne de la tribu est plus importante pour nous que la logique externe de la réalité. Voilà pourquoi, entre autres, le genre distinct du sexe est un concept auquel beaucoup accordent de l'importance, alors qu'il est fondé sur une idéologie fictive et arbitraire d'un supposé comportement inhéremment masculin et féminin, alors que ces comportements ne s'appliquent pas à tous dans le groupe du sexe. Donc une idéologie sexiste de la nature, car elle perpétue le rôle du genre. Et ce plutôt que la réelle logique externe, celle qui est suffisamment nuancée pour accorder que la corrélation comportementale du sexe est en effet une corrélation et non un composant. Je fonctionne par logique plutôt que par dogme, et pour cela je fus très seul pendant très longtemps. J'aurais pu passer toute ma vie sans savoir que ces gens que j'aime de tout cœur, qui connaissent et raisonnent avec les méthodes de la pensée critique, existent. Classifying gender by sociological traits, behavior and aesthetic, instead of physical traits, chromosomes, hormones, genitals, states that the behavior is more important. It states that gender is not just a random attribute that should, if we were to not be sexist, not have any sociological impact, but one that does. Classifying gender by behavior says that the behavior is more important, and that they must be seen differently to one another. This is gender rules. Classifying by physiology in itself does none of this. Gender distinct from sex presumes an objective masculinity and an objective femininity that does not actually exist, and it presumes this for their deviating sexualities to have a reference point, thus making any gender distinct from sex inherently sexist. Being a feminine man or a masculine woman doesn't make you less of a man or a woman, because feminine and masculine are made-up constructs. They are not real by the simple fact that they don't apply to all in the sex group, only a part of it. Gender distinct from sex states that actually they are inherent to the sex group. This is gender rules. This is sexism. You are not progressive. To be a boy is not to have a certain behavior, it is to have a certain genital. To claim otherwise is to participate in gender rules. If the behavior dictates the gender instead of the genital, that is gender rules. Being a boy does not inherently mean having a behavior psychology that girls cannot have. Claiming so is to comply with gender rules. It is neither logical nor progressive. You have failed on every point. 3rd of August, 2025. Why would the masculine percentage of males be more intrinsic to the sex group than the feminine percentage of males? Gender distinct from sex inexorably states that it is. Les théories sont multiples mais la vérité est singulière. Les théories qui sont, selon les probabilités, plus proches de la vérité, valent plus que les théories qui sont, selon les probabilités, plus éloignées de la vérité. Pas toutes les théories ne se valent. It may be a bit late to state this after having been so open to it for so long, but I see clearly why I should disapprove of transsexual as well as of transgender. That is, in the idea that making bodily changes is of a sufficient argument to say that gender has been altered. And I'm coming back to this for two reasons. One, because it isn't. The clearest indicator for gender will always be chromosomes, and we are not yet capable of changing those. When we will be, I will gladly revisit this opinion. And two, because people don't care about the non-social, physiological reasonings. They only care about gender for the rules attached to them. I stated that transsexual is not inherently sexist, that it does not inherently perpetuate gender roles, but that certainly is how it's going to be used by every single person using this logic to say that their sex has been altered. In the world beyond gender roles that we should be striving towards, it shouldn't matter if one is female or male, so best let the criteria for judging which is which be none other than chromosomes, for those do seem like the fairest indicator. Gender distinct from sex perpetuates gender roles. Prove me wrong. It is neither logical nor progressive. You have failed on every point. 4th of August, 2025. Now that I have finally come to a close to this exercise, after 52 entries, 153 pages, and 7 months of writing, I must establish the mentality that I should leave on. I must not part with open frustration. I must part on a sustainable mentality, for I cannot improve the situation, so I must make peace with it. The mentality I will adopt is the same I must have with racist people and believers. I respect you as a person, but I do not respect your racist opinions, and I forgive you for having them, for you are the result of circumstance. And I forgive you for not knowing that you are a racist, for that is sometimes the case. I respect you as a person, but I do not respect your belief and its immorality. Following a list of rules is obedience, not morality. Doing good and desire for heaven and purpose and in fear of hell is selfishness, not morality. And I forgive you for having them, for you are the result of circumstance. And I forgive you for not knowing that you are immoral, for that is usually the case. I respect you as a person, but I do not respect your sexist beliefs, and I forgive you for having them, for you are the result of circumstance, and I do not blame you for not knowing that you are sexist. I must be better than them. Just like believers, they believe that they are the good guys. They believe that they are moral, and that those who disagree are immoral. It is difficult, but we must forgive them. They are the result of circumstance, as we all are. We must be better than them. You are allowed to be sexist. I love you anyway. Je pense que car je suis autiste, je suis moins enclin à réfléchir selon les arbitraires processus de réflexion dogmatique sociétale, et en conséquence plus enclin à réfléchir selon une logique externe aux dogmes sociétaux, et donc généralement plus logique pour cela. Les faits résultent à ce que les autistes haut fonctionnants peuvent avoir l'air surprenamment intelligents, mais la vérité est le simple fait qu'ils ne sont pas contraignés par les mêmes obligations ou habitudes de raisonnement traditionnel. « 8th of August, 2025. Je cherche à comprendre pourquoi mon frère accorde plus d'importance à ce que les gens pensent être la vérité, plutôt que à ce qui est probablement la vérité. Et je reviens toujours à penser que c'est car il accorde énormément de valeur à l'identité, plus même qu'à la logique. If I'm wrong about something, I want to be explained so. If the probabilities point as to my opinion being wrong, I want to be explained so. I want to understand so internally. I want my opinions to be detached from my identity, so that I may change them whenever the need. If you give more importance to identity rather than critical reasoning, you are putting sticks in the wheels of your mind. You are allowing to get so attached and intertwined with an opinion that you will never allow yourself to nuance it. You have become the opinion instead of the presentator of it. Page 8. I'm very glad that I am putting down these thoughts on paper. I find that when one keeps one's thoughts in their mind, they become their opinions instead of the presentator of them. You tend to more easily lose track of the lines of reasonings you followed and become the opinion, have more difficulty in seeing the flaws in the mental tracks you followed. But if those tracks are written down, you can retrace your steps at any point and find bumps on the roads, or entire deviations that you had initially missed. I must be better than them and always allow myself to change my opinion. I must hold the opinion, but never be the opinion. Page 131 and 132. I think I've come to understand some of the reasoning principles that my sibling adopts. They value what an individual identifies as highly than rational evidence. It doesn't matter if it is negative for all others. If the individual identifies as such, that is to them what matters. Page 134. Why is this? Is it identity that they hold in so high value? I can only suppose so. Maybe they should ask themselves why they give such immense importance to identity, and if things would be better if they did not. Page 136. Let's teach ourselves to see the world through the evidence, instead of through what people make of the evidence. On another topic, I have been rereading the first 50 pages of Thinking About Sexuality, and there is an opinion that I want to go back on. It is about dysphoria. I stated that dysphoria should play no part in justifying transgender, because gender is of the mind and of social matters. I don't agree with this anymore. Because I understand that the argument is that dysphoria is an indicator that an individual's sex is misfit. This argument I grant, and I believe that I was wrong about. The part of the equation that I disagree with is the idea that there is such a thing as an objectively masculine behavior and an objectively feminine behavior, that the people in the sex group who don't abide to these somehow don't count. This is what is sexist. This and the fact that trans people truly do care about gender roles, and gender roles is what pushes them to state that their gender is distinct from sex. The reason why I put the date on these entries is because I want to be allowed to go back on them. I believed it when I wrote it. It was based on faithful data and understanding, but both of those evolved since then, and thus my opinion shifted with it. I am no stranger to physical dysphoria. I feel it myself with body hair and facial hair. This is why I do intense pulsed light. But I do disagree with social dysphoria, because your gender should not be a factor in how you are treated in society. You do not need to be a woman to dress and act like one. Implying so is bringing gender roles into reality. Another thing I want to go back on, that I have stated much more recently, is that transsexual isn't enough to say that sex has been changed. I find it logical enough to say that it is, but it was good to explore the opposite opinion. As long as gender is based on physiological traits instead of social traits, it is not inherently sexist as I perceive it. What I petition for is for the categorization to not be based on sociological dogmas of male and female that will necessarily comply with gender rules. I'll let the biology people tell me if yes or no bodily modifications can justify an altered categorization of sex. That is not my specialty. What I'm concerned with are the humanities and social sciences. Social matters is where I have a voice. Of course, you are allowed to disagree with any of this, just as I am allowed to explain my opinion over the course of over 150 pages. As a French person, I give immense importance to freedom of speech and expression and freedom of opinion. And so, to my understanding, you are absolutely allowed to think that gender roles should exist, even if I do not. You are allowed to be sexist. I love you anyway. Why would the masculine percentage of males be more intrinsic to the sex group than the feminine percentage of males? Why would the feminine percentage of females be more intrinsic to the sex group than the masculine percentage of females? The way in which you are categorizing gender is based off of the ideals of sexist dogmas. With love, an angry femboy. 9th of August 2025. Quelques commentaires en vrac que j'ai composés cette année et que je veux préserver avec cet exercice. April of 2025. Elle a ou a eu de la testostérone dans son corps. C'est donc techniquement autant de la triche que si une femme avait pris de la testostérone pour se muscler. Ce n'est pas une question de genre, c'est une question de la substance qui occupe le corps. Bien sûr, la prochaine question serait quelle est la place d'une femme transgenre si elle fait du remplacement d'hormones? Elle aura un désavantage physique dans le camp des hommes et la possibilité d'un avantage physique dans le camp des femmes. C'est un dilemme. 2nd of July 2025. If this helps, being straight does not mean not being in the possibility of being attracted to one of the same sex, and same thing other way around. Straight males are attracted to femboys.